Factsverse presents Man Finds a Moose. What he did next changed its life. There are people who like animals, and there are people who love animals. Those who love animals take them into their homes and treat them as members of the family. Animal lovers will do anything possible to save an animal in need. Many animal lovers will go above and beyond for wild animals as well as domesticated ones, and Eric PLUCAS is one of these animal lovers. Eric's a farm owner in Lithuania. He is one of those people who prefer the quiet, comfortable countryside to the loud, bustling streets of the city. Eric was very content in his quiet farmhouse. He enjoyed the simple life. Eric was having a day that was not out of the ordinary. He went to work just like everybody did, and then he headed home afterwards. When he got home, he discovered that he had an unexpected visitor. Lying at his front gate was a baby moose. Eric knew that there were plenty of wild animals in the area around his home, but none had ever settled in so close to the house. Eric looked around and there was no mother moose in sight. Eric realized quickly that the baby moose was all alone. He wanted to approach the baby moose, but he knew that that could be dangerous. If the mother was hiding somewhere, she could become very angry at Eric for approaching her young. Before going near the baby moose, he decided to search the area to be sure the baby's mother wasn't lying in wait. Although Eric lived in the forest out in the wild, he didn't know much about this particular wild animal. What he did know was that the baby was alone and it needed help. He assumed that she was no older than, maybe 2 weeks, and she looked very fragile and helpless. He believed hunters might have killed the baby's mother, and she had no choice but to escape and run away. Eric thought the baby quickly became exhausted and maybe even injured, which is why she ended up at his front gate. Looking at the weak and fragile moose, his heart just broke. He was an animal lover, and seeing a scared little moose, it made him feel terrible. Eric realized right away this moose was severely injured and likely traumatized, so he knew that the moose needed help. He knew that she could never defend herself against predators in her current shape. So he did the one thing he knew he could do. Eric picked up the baby moose and took her into his house. He thought his home would be the best place for her to heal, where she wouldn't be a sitting duck for predators. When Eric went to pick her up, he noticed that she had fresh, bloody wounds and flies were buzzing around her. She was filthy, but that didn't stop Eric from wanting to help the moose. She was starving, dirty, and obviously sad, desperately needing Eric's help. Eric had no idea what he was going to do, he just knew the baby moose required his assistance. He wasn't sure how to care for a baby moose, so he called a few friends for advice. Unfortunately, he did not get the response that he expected. One of Eric's friends wondered if it would even be legal to take in a baby moose. Another told him to let nature take its course, meaning let it be attacked by predators and eaten and go back into the food chain. Well, Eric was not going to accept any of that feedback, so he made another call. The baby moose seemed to be getting worse by the minute, and Eric started to panic. He was hoping that Animal Services would be able to tell him what he needed to do to help save the baby moose's life. When Eric called Animal Services, he got a response that he wasn't expecting. The staff member told Eric that a lot was going on that day, so nobody was available to help. They asked Eric to care for the baby moose until the next day. Well, Eric didn't know how to save the baby moose, so he decided to just take things one step at a time. He figured the first step in helping the moose regain her strength would be to feed her. So he put a bowl of milk and a plate of leaves in front of her to eat. When she started eating, Eric was relieved. While the baby was eating, Eric got started working on a shelter for the moose. He wanted her to be comfortable until Animal Services arrived. Eric was doing his best to help her, but he couldn't wait for the morning when Animal Services came. He was sure that they were better equipped to care for the baby moose than he was. He was up most of the night, keeping an eye on the baby, waiting for Animal Services to get there. The next morning, Eric got a call from Animal Services. He thought they were calling for directions to his house, but instead, they told him they weren't coming. They told Eric that they couldn't take the baby moose. Instead, they told Eric to call a local hunter to put her down. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He wasn't going to let the baby moose die after she had fought so hard to escape the hunters who hurt her in the first place. Eric was not going to allow the baby to suffer the same fate as her mother. Even though it was illegal to keep wild animals, Eric didn't care. He was getting attached to the baby moose, and he was determined to save her life, even if he had to do it alone. Eric told Animal Services that he wouldn't allow hunters to kill the baby. Well, a debate began. Animal Services reminded Eric that keeping the moose was illegal, and caring for a wild animal could also be dangerous. Finally, they backed down. They realized they weren't going to win this argument against Eric, so They gave him the right to care for the baby moose. After being given the right, Eric felt like a real father now with an adopted child. The first thing he did was to give the baby moose a name, and from then on he called the moose Emma. Eric realized very early on that choosing a name for a baby would be the easiest part of the process. Caring for Emma and helping her heal, that was challenging. Eric gave Emma as much attention as possible, and soon her fear began to subside, and Emma seemed to be trusting her new caretaker. The two began to bond, and Emma was starting to feel safe. Eric felt as though, with Emma, he found a family. Eric knew that Emma felt safest when he was around, and he needed to make sleeping arrangements, so he allowed Emma to choose where she wanted to sleep. If Emma wanted to sleep in the barn, well, she'd sleep in the barn, and Eric would sleep there with her. If she wanted to sleep in the open, Eric stayed there by her side as well. Eric knew Emma was a wild animal and she'd be at home in the forest. He also knew that her last experience in the wild was a traumatic one. He took her for walks in the woods, but only at her own pace. The first walk that Eric and his daughter took was kind of tough. Emma appeared petrified when they entered the forest. Not wanting to push her, the two returned home. Each day, Eric took walks with Emma, and each time they went, she felt more and more comfortable. She seemed to feel safe with Eric walking by her side. He was happy that his daughter was finally enjoying nature. Eric took Emma to the forest every day and showed her where to find food. After several trips to the woods, Emma was ready to go out on her own. Thanks to Eric, the young moose had the courage and confidence that she needed to go into the wild. Soon, Emma was spending the whole day in the forest and still coming home at night to sleep. Eric always worried that the day might come where she wouldn't come home. This day came, and Eric panicked. He went out searching for Emma, but she was nowhere to be found. He worried a hunter or a predator had gotten to her. He spent countless sleepless nights worrying about Emma. He knew that he had to let her grow up and do her own thing, but still it was hard for him. Eric did finally start to move on, but he'd often think of Emma. When he came home one day and saw Emma in front of his house, he couldn't believe his eyes. His daughter had returned home for a visit, and she appeared to be happy and healthy. Well, from that day on, Emma came home every day. Eric would play with her, they'd swam together, they had a lot of fun. They were best friends, even though some people did not approve of this father-daughter relationship. Eric's friends and family members thought he was nuts. Well, Eric knew he couldn't keep Emma confined in his home now. She had to run and do the things that wild animals often did. And she's a lot bigger now, too, so he came up with a risky plan to ensure his daughter's safety. Eric called the local hunters and invited them over to meet Emma in person. He served the hunters a meal of steak and potatoes and let them see how kind and gentle Emma was. Eric knew it was a risk because the hunters would not know that there was a moose in the forest ready to be killed. Fortunately, everything went the way he hoped. All the hunters agreed never to harm Emma in any way. Finally, Emma would be safe from hunters. Eric thought raising Emma was the greatest joy he'd ever experienced. When he realized that Emma was pregnant and he would become now a grandfather, that was the biggest joy of Eric's life. He was thankful that Emma had come into his life, and he was excited by the fact that his family was about to grow. This man found a moose, and what he did changed its life and his. Subscribe for more.